My name is Sarah, and I'm 28. Mom yelled, "You'll never be as successful as your sister." I replied, "Then ask her to pay your debts." The room fell silent. I just smiled and texted someone. 20 minutes later, they couldn't believe who walked through their front door. "Where are you watching from today?" Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt underestimated by your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me back up and tell you how we got to this nuclear moment at my parents' 60th anniversary dinner. 2 months ago, I thought I was the family disappointment. Fresh out of culinary school with student loans that would make your head spin, working at a chain restaurant while my older sister Jessica ran her own law firm. Every family gathering was a masterclass in subtle humiliation. "Sarah's still figuring things out," Mom would say with that patronizing smile. "Not everyone can be as driven as Jessica." Dad would nod knowingly, like I was some charity case they hadn't quite given up on yet. My sister would just smirk from across the room, designer handbag clutched like a trophy. What they didn't know was that I'd been working nights at the restaurant while secretly building something during my free time. Food delivery wasn't just a job for me, it was research. I watched neighborhoods, studied patterns, learned which areas had money but lacked quality dining options. 3 weeks before the anniversary dinner, everything changed. I'd scraped together enough money to rent a small food truck. Nothing fancy. Just 4 wheels and a dream. My specialty was elevated comfort food. Gourmet versions of dishes people grew up loving, but couldn't find done right anymore. The first week was brutal. 12-hour days, burns on my arms, customers complaining about wait times. But slowly, word spread. Business professionals started lining up during lunch hours. College students discovered my late-night menu. Food bloggers began posting photos. Then Marcus Webb happened. Marcus owned 3 upscale restaurants downtown and had a reputation for discovering talent. He showed up on a random Tuesday, ordered my signature short rib grilled cheese, and didn't say a word while eating. I figured I'd blown it. 2 days later, he called. "I want to discuss a partnership." That phone conversation led to a meeting. That meeting led to paperwork. That paperwork led to me signing a contract that would change my family's opinion of me forever. But I decided to keep quiet until the anniversary dinner. Let them have their last moment of superiority before I completely flipped the script on their expectations of little Sarah. The anniversary dinner was supposed to be intimate, just family at Mom and Dad's house, celebrating 4 decades of marriage. I arrived fashionably late, knowing Jessica would already be holding court with stories about her latest high-profile case. Sure enough, she was positioned at the head of the table like some kind of legal royalty. "The jury deliberated for 6 hours, she was saying, gesturing dramatically with her wine glass. 6 hours before they realized I'd completely dismantled the opposing counsel's argument. Mom hung on every word like Jessica was delivering the Sermon on the Mount. Dad nodded approvingly, occasionally throwing in comments about his daughter's brilliance. I slipped into my usual seat at the far end of the table, the one closest to the kitchen in case anyone needed drinks refilled. "Sarah!" Mom noticed me finally. "How's the restaurant treating you?" The way she said restaurant made it sound like a leper colony. "Still working those late shifts?" "Something like that," I replied, serving myself from the casserole dish that had been passed around without stopping at my end of the table. Classic family dynamics at work. Jessica leaned forward with that concerned older sister expression she'd perfected. "You know, if you ever want to go back to school for something more practical, I could probably get you an interview at a corporate office. Administrative work pays better than food service." The condescension was breathtaking. Here I was, having just signed a partnership deal that would make her annual salary look like pocket change, and she was offering me filing jobs out of pity. "That's very generous," I said, cutting my chicken with surgical precision. "But I'm pretty committed to my current path." Dad cleared his throat. "Commitment is admirable, sweetheart, but sometimes you have to know when to fold. The restaurant industry is notoriously difficult. Maybe Jessica's right about exploring other options." What followed was 20 minutes of unsolicited career advice. Jessica explained the benefits of steady paychecks and health insurance. Mom worried about my financial security and reminded everyone that I was still paying off culinary school. Dad launched into statistics about small business failure rates. I sat there eating my dinner, letting them dig their hole deeper. Each piece of advice was another nail in the coffin of their credibility. They were so convinced of their own wisdom, so certain that I needed their guidance, that they never stopped to wonder if maybe things weren't exactly as they appeared. "The thing is," Mom said as she cleared the dinner plates, "success isn't just about passion. It's about making smart choices." Jessica understood that early on. That's when I knew it was time to make my move. "You're right, Mom," I said, putting down my fork. Success is about making smart choices. Speaking of which, how are those retirement investments working out for you? The question hung in the air like smoke. Mom's face tightened slightly. Dad shifted in his chair. Jessica looked confused by the sudden topic change, but I could see concern creeping into her expression. Our investments are fine, Dad said carefully. Why would you ask that? I pulled out my phone and pretended to check something. Oh, just curious. I mean, with the way the market's been lately and considering your mortgage situation, I trailed off meaningfully. Now I had their full attention. The thing about family dynamics is that everyone has secrets they think no one else knows about. My parents had refinanced their house twice in the past 5 years, thinking their children were oblivious to their financial struggles. Sarah, what exactly are you implying? Mom's voice had an edge to it. Nothing at all, I said innocently. I just think it's interesting how we define success differently. Like Jessica's law firm is doing well, but what about your personal situation, Jess? How's that working out? Jessica's confident demeanor cracked slightly. She'd been keeping her own financial problems quiet, but I'd noticed things. The designer handbag that she'd been carrying for 3 years running, the fact that she'd moved back in with our parents briefly last summer, claiming it was just temporary while she renovated her condo. My personal life is none of your business, Jessica said defensively. Of course not, I agreed. Just like my career choices shouldn't be everyone else's business either. But since we're all giving advice here, maybe we should be more honest about our own situations first. The room went deadly quiet. Mom looked between Jessica and me like she was watching a tennis match. Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. This wasn't the wholesome family dinner they'd planned. Sarah, I don't appreciate your tone, Mom said firmly. Whatever point you're trying to make, this isn't the time or place. That's when my phone buzzed with a text. Perfect timing. I glanced at it and smiled. Actually, Mom, this might be the perfect time. I have some news to share. I stood up from the table and walked to the living room window, making sure they could all see me clearly. Remember how you've been worried about my future? Well, you can stop. Jessica rolled her eyes. Let me guess. You got promoted to shift supervisor? Not exactly, I said, pulling up the contract on my phone. I got promoted to restaurant owner. Have you ever experienced that moment when your family realizes they've completely underestimated you? Drop a comment below if you know that feeling. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as 3 people who had spent years treating me like the family charity case tried to process what I'd just said. Owner? Dad repeated slowly, like the word was foreign to him. Co-owner, technically, I corrected, enjoying every second of their confusion. Marcus Webb, the guy who owns those 3 upscale restaurants downtown, he offered me a partnership. Jessica's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Partnership? Sarah, those restaurants generate millions in revenue annually. I know, I said simply. I've done my research. Mom was the first to recover. Honey, that's wonderful news, but partnerships can be complicated. Are you sure you understand what you're getting into? Maybe Jessica could look over the contract for you. Even in the face of my success, she couldn't help herself, still treating me like I needed supervision. Still assuming Jessica was the smart one who should handle the important stuff. Thanks for the offer, but I already had it reviewed by a legal team that specializes in restaurant partnerships, I said. They're quite impressed with the terms Marcus offered me. That hit Jessica right in the ego. Her specialty was corporate law, not restaurant partnerships, but she'd never admit she wasn't qualified to handle any legal document that crossed her path. Well, she said, trying to regain her composure. Congratulations. Though I hope you realize that restaurant partnerships often dissolve within the first 2 years. The industry is incredibly volatile. And there it was. The inability to just be happy for me. Even faced with evidence of my success, she had to find ways to diminish it. You're absolutely right, I agreed. That's why I made sure to negotiate terms that protect me regardless of what happens with the partnership itself. Dad leaned forward. What kind of terms? I pretended to hesitate like I wasn't sure I should share family secrets. Well, if the partnership doesn't work out, I keep the food truck and Marcus pays me a severance that would cover all my student loans plus a substantial investment fund for my next venture. The room went quiet again. They were starting to realize that not only was I not the family failure they'd assumed, but I might actually be the most financially secure person at the table. And if the partnership succeeds, Mom asked quietly, then in 5 years I'll own a significant percentage of a restaurant empire that's currently valued at about $12 million, I said casually. Like I was discussing the weather. Jessica's wine glass hit the table harder than intended. A small splash of red wine stained the white tablecloth, which somehow felt symbolic. 12 million? She whispered. That's when my phone rang. I glanced at the caller ID and couldn't suppress a smile. "Excuse me for just a moment," I said, answering the call. "Hi, Marcus. Yes, I'm having dinner with my family right now." "Really? That's incredible news." I could feel 3 pairs of eyes burning holes in my back as I continued the conversation. "The food blogger from the Times wants to feature us? And they're interested in documenting the expansion? That's amazing. Yes, I'll call you first thing Monday morning to discuss the details." I hung up and turned back to my stunned family. "Sorry about that. Business calls, you know how it is." But they didn't know how it was. They had no idea what it felt like to have people calling with opportunities instead of problems. "The New York Times?" Mom's voice was barely above a whisper. "Well, their food section," I clarified, because accuracy matters. "But yes, apparently they've been following the local food truck scene and want to do a feature on successful partnerships between established restaurateurs and emerging talent." I walked back to the table and sat down, suddenly very aware of how the entire dynamic had shifted. 20 minutes ago, I'd been the struggling family member who needed guidance. Now I was the one with news that made their own achievements seem ordinary. Jessica had gone completely quiet, which was unprecedented. She always had something to say, some way to position herself as the expert in the room. But there's no spinning someone else's success into your own superiority, especially when that success dwarfs your own. "Sarah," Dad said carefully, "this is wonderful news. I hope you know how proud we are." The words sounded hollow after years of subtle disappointment. How do you suddenly flip from "we're worried about your future" to "we're proud of you" without acknowledging the complete reversal? "Thank you," I said graciously. "I know this probably comes as a surprise." "A surprise is an understatement." Jessica finally found her voice. "How long have you been planning this?" "The partnership, I mean." "About 6 months," I admitted. "I wanted to make sure everything was solid before I said anything. You know how family can be when you talk about big dreams before their reality." Mom winced slightly. We all knew exactly what I meant. How many times had they responded to my aspirations with concerned looks and gentle suggestions to be more realistic? 6 months, Jessica repeated. "So while we thought you were just working at that chain restaurant, I was also building my own business, networking with industry professionals, and developing the concept that would eventually attract Marcus's attention," I finished. "Funny how things work out when people actually support your vision instead of trying to talk you out of it." The barb hit its mark. Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. "We were just trying to look out for you, sweetheart. Parents worry." "I know," I said, and I meant it. But there's a difference between worrying and constantly undermining someone's confidence, between being concerned and making someone feel like a disappointment. The anniversary dinner had officially become a therapy session. Mom dabbed at her eyes with her napkin, though I wasn't sure if it was from guilt or pride or just emotional overload. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we celebrate," I said, raising my water glass. 40 years of marriage deserves recognition, regardless of what else is happening. But nobody moved to toast. The elephant in the room was too big to ignore anymore. Years of family dynamics had just been completely upended, and we all needed a minute to adjust. That's when my phone buzzed with another text. I glanced at it and felt my smile widen. "Actually, there's one more thing I probably should mention." Jessica looked like she might pass out. "More?" "The Times feature is going to include a section on family support systems," I said, scrolling through the message. "They want to interview my family about how they encouraged my entrepreneurial spirit and believed in my vision even when it seemed impossible." The irony was perfect. Now they would have to publicly pretend they'd been supportive all along, or admit to a national publication that they'd spent years discouraging their daughter's dreams. "They want to interview us?" Mom's voice cracked slightly. "All of you," I confirmed, holding up my phone. "The journalist thinks it makes a better story when families rally around each other's dreams. She's particularly interested in how Jessica, being so successful in her own field, provided mentorship and encouragement to her younger sister. If Jessica's face had been pale before, now she looked positively green. The idea of being publicly credited with supporting a sister she'd spent years patronizing was clearly causing her physical distress. "Sarah," she said carefully, "maybe we should talk privately about this interview situation." "Why?" I asked innocently. "Don't you want to share how you've helped shape my success? I mean, all those conversations about making smart choices and being realistic about my future, they really motivated me to prove I could exceed everyone's expectations." Dad was catching on to the impossible position they were all in. If they participated in the interview honestly, they'd have to admit they'd been discouraging. If they participated dishonestly, they'd be lying to a national publication. If they refused to participate, they'd look like unsupportive family members. When is this interview supposed to happen? He asked. Next week, I said. They want to do it here, actually. The journalist loves the idea of capturing our family dynamic in its natural environment. Mom looked around the dining room like she was seeing it for the first time. The same room where they'd spent years making me feel like the family underachiever was about to be featured in the New York Times as an example of supportive parenting. Sweetheart, she said slowly, I hope you know that we've always believed in you. Maybe we didn't express it the right way, but we've always wanted the best for you. It was a masterclass in revisionist history. 3 hours ago, she'd been suggesting I find a more practical career path. Now she was claiming she'd always been my biggest supporter. I know, Mom, I said gently. And I think this interview will be a perfect opportunity for all of us to talk about how families can better support each other's dreams. Jessica excused herself to use the bathroom, but I could tell she was really just escaping to process everything that had happened. The golden child discovering her little sister had outshone her was clearly more than she could handle in public. When she returned, she looked like she'd been crying. Sarah, can I talk to you for a minute? Alone? We stepped into the kitchen, where she immediately broke down. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I've been horrible to you. All those comments about being realistic and finding something more stable, I thought I was protecting you from disappointment. Were you? I asked quietly. Or were you protecting yourself from competition? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. Jess, I continued. I'm not angry with you, but this interview is happening whether you participate or not. The story is about how family support leads to success. You can either be part of that narrative, or you can be notably absent from it. She nodded, understanding the choice she was facing. What do you need from us? Just honesty, I said. About how families can do better. About how success doesn't look the same for everyone. About how believing in someone sometimes means letting them fail on their own terms instead of trying to protect them from their own dreams. When we returned to the dining room, the whole atmosphere had changed. Mom and Dad were sitting quietly, looking like they were having their own moment of reckoning. So, Dad said as we sat back down, tell us more about this partnership. What's your role going to be? And for the first time in my adult life, my family asked me questions because they genuinely wanted to hear my answers. Not because they were looking for problems to solve or dreams to redirect. The revenge wasn't in humiliating them. It was in forcing them to see me clearly for the first time, and watching them realize how much they'd underestimated the daughter they thought they knew. But what happened during that interview the following week? That's when things got really interesting. The journalist arrived Tuesday morning with a photographer and enough recording equipment to document a presidential speech. Amanda Chen had that sharp, observant look that made you understand why she'd built a reputation for getting to the heart of every story she covered. I'm fascinated by family dynamics and entrepreneurial success, she said, setting up her recorder on our dining room table, the same table where I'd dropped my bombshell just a week earlier. So often we hear about families who discourage risk-taking, but your story suggests the opposite. Mom and Dad exchanged a quick glance. Jessica sat ramrod straight like she was preparing for a deposition rather than a friendly interview. Sarah has always been determined, Mom began carefully. Even as a child, when she set her mind to something, there was no stopping her. I had to give her credit for creativity. She was technically telling the truth while completely omitting the years of discouragement and subtle undermining. And Jessica, Amanda turned to my sister, what was it like watching your younger sister pursue such an ambitious path? Did you offer advice from your own entrepreneurial experience? Jessica's law firm was successful, but she was hardly an entrepreneur. She'd joined an established practice straight out of law school and worked her way up to partner. Calling it entrepreneurial was generous at best. I tried to share what I'd learned about business relationships and contracts, Jessica said diplomatically. Sarah was always very independent in her decision-making. Amanda scribbled notes, clearly picking up on the careful word choices and diplomatic phrasing that suggested there was more to this story than the surface-level harmony. Tell me about a specific moment when the family came together to support Sarah's vision, Amanda requested. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. I could practically see them searching their memories for a single instance of unqualified support that they could describe honestly. Well, Dad finally spoke up. There was the time Sarah wanted to buy professional-grade kitchen equipment for her apartment. We helped her research the best options within her budget. What he didn't mention was that the conversation had actually been him trying to talk me out of the purchase because it seemed like an unnecessary expense for someone who wasn't even working in fine dining yet. Amanda was clearly sensing something was off. Good journalists have radar for family dynamics that don't quite add up. Sarah, she said, turning to me, how would you describe your family's reaction when you first told them about your business plans? This was my moment. I could play along with their revisionist history, or I could tell the truth that would make for a much more interesting article. Honestly, Amanda, they were terrified, I said. The room went dead quiet. Mom's smile froze on her face. Jessica's eyes widened in panic. Terrified? Amanda leaned forward, sensing she was about to get the real story. They thought I was making a huge mistake, I continued. The restaurant industry is notoriously difficult, and they'd watched me struggle through culinary school and work low-paying jobs for years. They were afraid I was setting myself up for disappointment. It wasn't a betrayal. It was honesty. And it was making for a much better story than the sanitized version they'd been trying to present. What do you think will happen next? Drop your predictions in the comments below. Amanda's pen was moving rapidly across her notepad. So, how did you handle that fear from your family? That must have been challenging when you needed their support most. It was incredibly difficult, I admitted. But it also motivated me to be absolutely certain I could succeed on my own terms. When people you love don't believe in your vision, you have to believe in it twice as hard. Mom looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. Jessica was staring at her hands, probably wondering how this interview had gone so far off script. And when did that dynamic change? Amanda asked. When did they start to see your vision coming to fruition? Last week, I said simply. The photographer, who had been quietly snapping candid shots during the conversation, suddenly looked up with interest. Even he could sense the story was taking an unexpected turn. Last week? Amanda repeated. You mean they didn't know about the partnership until very recently? I kept it quiet until everything was finalized, I explained. I'd learned that sharing dreams with people who don't understand them can be more discouraging than helpful. So I decided to prove myself first, then share the results. Jessica finally found her voice. We weren't trying to discourage you, Sarah. We were trying to be realistic. I know, I said gently. And now we can all see how that felt from both sides. Amanda was clearly realizing this wasn't the supportive family story her editor had pitched. This was something much more nuanced and potentially controversial. How do you think other families could handle similar situations better? She asked. Ask better questions, I said immediately. Instead of asking, are you sure about this? Ask, how can I help you succeed? Instead of listing all the ways something could fail, ask about the plans for overcoming obstacles. Dad cleared his throat. That's actually very insightful. I wish we'd thought of that approach earlier. It's not too late, I said, meeting his eyes. We're all still learning how to support each other better. The interview continued for another hour, with Amanda skillfully drawing out stories that illustrated the complexity of family dynamics around risk-taking and success. By the end, she had a completely different article than the one she'd expected to write. This is going to resonate with a lot of families, she told me as she packed up her equipment. The idea that love and support don't always look the way we think they should. After Amanda and her photographer left, the four of us sat in the living room in contemplative silence. Are we going to come across as horrible parents in this article? Mom asked quietly. You're going to come across as real parents, I said. Parents who love their daughter but made some mistakes along the way. Parents who learned something and decided to do better. Jessica looked up from her phone. I just want you to know, Sarah, I really am proud of you. I always have been, even when I was too insecure to show it properly. It was the first completely honest thing she'd said to me in years. That evening, Marcus called with more news. The Times article is generating buzz even before it's published, he said. 3 different restaurant groups have reached out about potential collaborations, and there's talk of a cookbook deal. A cookbook deal. 6 months ago, I'd been serving pre-made salads at a chain restaurant. Now publishers were interested in my recipes and business story, but the real transformation wasn't in my career. It was in my family's willingness to see me as someone whose dreams were worth believing in, even when they didn't understand them. The article published 3 weeks later with the headline, When Love Looks Like Doubt, How One Family Learned to Support Unconventional Dreams. Amanda had masterfully woven together our story with expert commentary on family psychology and entrepreneurial success. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My phone started ringing before 7 a.m. with interview requests, collaboration proposals, and messages from readers who connected with the family dynamics we'd described. Sarah, Mom called me that morning, her voice shaky with emotion. Have you seen the comments on the online version? I hadn't, but I pulled up the article on my laptop and scrolled down to the reader responses. Hundreds of comments from people sharing their own stories of family members who had discouraged their dreams, and others who had learned to be better supporters. My parents convinced me not to pursue music. 20 years later, I still wonder what might have been, wrote one reader. This article helped me realize I've been doing the same thing to my daughter, Time to have a conversation, wrote another. But it was the comment from someone named Patricia Johnson that stopped me cold. I recognize this family. I went to high school with Jessica. This article doesn't tell the whole story. My stomach dropped. I called Jessica immediately. Did you see the comment from Patricia Johnson? I asked without preamble. I saw it. Jessica's voice was tight. She's referring to something that happened in high school, something I never told you about. What are you talking about? Jessica was quiet for a long moment. Remember when you were in 8th grade and you won that regional cooking competition? The one that came with a scholarship to that summer culinary program? Of course. Mom and Dad said we couldn't afford for me to go, even with the scholarship. Sarah. Jessica's voice broke slightly. They could afford it. I talked them out of letting you go. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? I was jealous. I was 17 and struggling in my AP classes, and my little sister was getting recognition for something that seemed so effortless for her. I told them it would interfere with your regular academics, that culinary arts wasn't a real career path, that they'd be wasting money on a hobby. I sat down heavily on my couch, trying to process this revelation. That summer program had been my dream. The disappointment when my parents said no had been devastating, and I'd blamed it on money for over a decade. Jessica, I said quietly, that program launched 3 kids into professional culinary careers. One of them owns restaurants in 5 states now. I know, she whispered. I've followed their careers over the years. I know exactly what I cost you. The conversation continued for over an hour, with Jessica confessing to other moments when she'd undermined my confidence or influenced our parents' perceptions of my abilities. Each revelation was like a puzzle piece clicking into place, explaining years of subtle family dynamics I'd never fully understood. Why are you telling me this now? I asked finally. Because that article made me realize how much damage I've done over the years, and because Patricia's comment means other people from our past are going to start connecting dots. I'd rather you hear the truth from me. After we hung up, I sat staring at my phone, feeling a complex mix of anger, sadness, and oddly relief. At least now I understood why my family's lack of support had always felt so coordinated, so systematic. But I also realized something else. Knowing the truth didn't diminish what I'd accomplished. If anything, it made my success more meaningful. I'd overcome not just external obstacles, but years of deliberate sabotage from someone who was supposed to be on my team. My phone rang again. This time it was Marcus. Have you been following the article response online? He asked. Some of it. Why? Food Network wants to meet with us. Food Network. The holy grail of culinary careers. I'd grown up watching their shows, dreaming of someday being talented enough to catch their attention. Now they were calling me. They want to discuss a potential show concept, Marcus continued. Something about family dynamics and food culture. Your article really struck a nerve with their programming team. I was still processing Jessica's confessions, and now this. It was like the universe was determined to pack a lifetime of revelations into a single day. When do they want to meet? Next week, in New York. Sarah, this is huge. Food Network doesn't take meetings with unknowns. The fact that they're reaching out means they see serious potential. After the call, I realized I needed to tell my family about this development. But Jessica's confessions had changed everything. How do you celebrate new opportunities with people who've been actively working against your success for years? I decided to call a family meeting. Not a celebration, not an announcement, but a real conversation about everything that had been revealed and what it meant for our relationships going forward. They all agreed to come over that evening. When they arrived, the atmosphere was tense. Everyone knew Patricia Johnson's comment had opened a can of worms that couldn't be closed again. Before we talk about anything else, I said, I need to understand the full scope of what's been happening behind my back all these years. Mom and Dad looked confused, but Jessica's face told them everything they needed to know about what was coming. Jessica told me about the summer culinary program, I continued. About how she convinced you not to let me go, even though we could afford it. Mom's face went white. Sarah, we can explain. I don't need explanations, I interrupted. I need honesty. Complete honesty about every time someone in this family actively worked against my interests. What followed was one of the most difficult conversations we'd ever had as a family. Dad admitted to times he'd steered me away from opportunities because Jessica had convinced him I wasn't ready. Mom confessed to downplaying my achievements to relatives to avoid making Jessica feel overshadowed. But the biggest revelation came when Jessica broke down completely and admitted that she'd actively sabotaged my confidence for years because she was afraid I was naturally more talented than she was, and she couldn't handle being the less successful sister. The thing is, she sobbed, You are more naturally talented. You always have been. Everything I've achieved has been through grinding and working twice as hard as everyone else. But you just see possibilities that other people don't see. And I was terrified that everyone would figure out I was the ordinary one. It was brutally honest and heartbreaking and infuriating all at once. My sister, who I'd looked up to and tried to emulate for years, had been systematically undermining me because she was afraid of being outshined. So when you saw me struggling at the restaurant, working multiple jobs that didn't make you want to help me succeed, I asked. It made me feel safer, she admitted. I know how awful that sounds, but at least when you were struggling, I didn't have to worry about being compared to you. The room was silent except for the sound of Jessica crying and Mom trying to comfort her. Well, I said finally, I have news that's going to make you very uncomfortable then. I told them about Food Network, about the potential show, about the 3 restaurant groups that wanted to collaborate, about the cookbook deal that was looking more likely every day. With each piece of news, Jessica seemed to shrink further into herself. This wasn't just success anymore. This was the kind of success that gets written about in business magazines and featured on morning talk shows. How do you feel about that, Jess? I asked pointedly. She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. Terrified, she said honestly, and proud, and ashamed, and happy for you, all at the same time. It was the most honest answer she'd ever given me about anything. Good, I said, because we're going to figure out how to be a family that supports each other instead of competing. And it starts with you deciding whether you want to be my sister or my saboteur. That night, I lay awake thinking about everything that had been revealed. The family I thought I knew had never really existed. But maybe, for the first time, we could build something real. The Food Network meeting was scheduled for Friday morning at their headquarters in Chelsea Market. I took the train to New York, spending the 3-hour ride mentally preparing for what could be the conversation that changed my entire career trajectory. But when I arrived at Penn Station, Jessica was waiting for me. What are you doing here? I asked, genuinely shocked to see her. I came to support you, she said simply. I know I don't deserve to be here after everything I've done, but I wanted you to know that I'm trying to be different. We walked through the city together, and for the first time in years, it felt like we were actually sisters instead of competitors. Jessica asked thoughtful questions about my business plans and listened to my answers without trying to find problems or offer unsolicited advice. I've been seeing a therapist, she admitted as we crossed 14th Street. Since our family meeting, I needed to understand why I've been so threatened by your success. And what have you learned? That I've been defining myself by being better than you instead of just being good at what I do, she said. And that I've wasted years being jealous of someone I should have been celebrating. The Food Network offices were everything I'd imagined and more. Glass-walled conference rooms overlooking the Hudson River, award displays in every hallway, and the constant energy of creative people developing content that would reach millions of viewers. The meeting was with 3 executives: Lisa Morton, the VP of Programming, David Chen, a senior producer, and Maria Santos, who specialized in food culture content. Your story has generated more reader engagement than any food-related article we've tracked this year, Lisa began. The combination of family dynamics and culinary success is exactly the kind of authentic storytelling our audience is craving. They outlined a show concept that would follow my restaurant expansion while exploring how family relationships impact professional success. Each episode would feature families in the food industry dealing with similar dynamics to what my family had experienced. We want you to be the host, David explained. Someone who's lived this experience and can help other families navigate these challenges. A hosting gig on Food Network. 6 months ago, I'd been worried about making rent. Now they were offering me a platform to reach millions of people while doing what I loved most. But the best part was the look on Jessica's face when we left the meeting. Pride. Pure, uncomplicated pride in her little sister's achievement. I can't believe they want to build a show around you, she said as we walked back toward Penn Station. Neither can I admitted. But Jessica, I want you to know something. This doesn't have to change anything between us. We don't have to be in competition anymore. She stopped walking and turned to face me. Sarah, I need to tell you something else. My heart sank. More confessions? More sabotage I didn't know about? When I heard about the Food Network meeting, I called Patricia Johnson, she said. You what? I asked her to delete her comment from the article. I offered to pay her to keep quiet about our high school years. I stared at her in disbelief. Even now, even after everything we'd talked about, she was still trying to manage my story. She turned me down, Jessica continued, and she was right to. She told me that real change doesn't come from hiding the truth. It comes from owning it and doing better. We stood on the sidewalk in the middle of Manhattan, two sisters finally seeing each other clearly for the first time in their adult lives. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "That you were right to tell your story honestly, and that I was sorry for asking her to help me cover up my mistakes," Jessica said. "And that if anyone asks about our past, I'll tell them the truth about who I was and who I'm trying to become." That evening, we had dinner at a small restaurant in Little Italy. Just the two of us, talking like sisters instead of rivals for the first time since we were children. "I want to be better," Jessica said over dessert. "I want to be the kind of sister who builds you up instead of tearing you down." "Then be that," I said simply. "Starting now." When we got back to the hotel, there was a message waiting for me from Marcus. The Food Network executives had already called him with a preliminary offer. The show was moving forward, but the real victory wasn't the show or the partnership or any of the external validation. It was the conversation I had with Jessica that night, where we finally figured out how to be family. 6 months later, I was standing in the kitchen of my second restaurant location, filming the pilot episode of Family Table, my Food Network show about how family dynamics impact food culture and business success. The cameras were rolling as I prepared my signature dish, the short rib grilled cheese that had first caught Marcus's attention. But instead of cooking alone, Jessica was beside me, helping prep ingredients and sharing stories about our childhood relationship with food. "Growing up, Sarah was always experimenting in the kitchen," she told the camera. "I used to get annoyed because she'd use up all our ingredients on her creative projects. I wish I'd realized she was actually developing the skills that would make her successful." It was honest without being self-flagellating. Jessica had learned to talk about our past without making herself the victim of her own poor choices. "The thing about family support," I said to the camera while plating the sandwich, "is that it doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Sometimes the most loving thing family can do is get out of each other's way and let each person find their own path to success." The restaurant was bustling around us, a perfect example of how dreams can become reality when you persist despite discouragement. Marcus moved between tables, greeting customers who had come specifically because of the Times article or the early buzz about the show. Mom and Dad were seated at the corner table, proudly wearing Family Table t-shirts that the production team had made. They'd become genuinely supportive once they understood how their previous approach had affected me, though it had taken several family therapy sessions to get there. "The response to the show concept has been incredible," the producer told me during a break in filming. "We've got families from all over the country applying to be featured in future episodes. Apparently, your story really resonated with people." After wrapping filming for the day, my family gathered for a private dinner at the restaurant. It had become our new tradition, weekly family dinners where we actually supported each other's dreams instead of questioning them. "I got news today," Jessica announced as we shared appetizers. "The law firm is promoting me to senior partner, and they want me to head up a new division specializing in small business contracts." "That's incredible," I said, genuinely thrilled for her success. "You'll be amazing at that." "I was thinking," she continued, "maybe some of your Food Network families could use legal guidance when they're starting their businesses. I could offer consultation services." It was the perfect example of how we'd learned to support each other's success instead of competing with it. Jessica had found a way to build on her own expertise while helping advance my work, rather than trying to diminish it. "Speaking of supporting each other," Mom interjected, "your father and I have been talking about turning our experience into something positive, too." Dad nodded. "We're thinking about offering workshops for parents of adult children who are starting businesses, how to be supportive instead of what we were." I looked around the table at my family. All of us finding ways to transform our mistakes into opportunities to help other people avoid similar problems. "You know what the best part is?" I said, raising my wine glass for a toast. "What?" Jessica asked. "We're all successful now, but more importantly, we're all happy for each other's success. That's the real victory." We clinked glasses, and for the first time in our adult lives, it felt like we were genuinely celebrating together instead of just going through the motions of family unity. After dinner, as I locked up the restaurant and headed home to my new apartment, fully paid for with my partnership earnings, I thought about how dramatically everything had changed in less than a year. The success was gratifying, but what mattered most was the transformation in my relationships. My family had learned to see me as someone whose dreams were worth believing in, and I'd learned that sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who are most afraid of being left behind. The text on my phone interrupted my reflection. It was from Amanda, the Times journalist. "Watching your show preview online. So proud to have been part of your story. You've inspired more families than you know." As I read her message, I realized that the real revenge hadn't been in proving my family wrong about my potential. It had been in proving that families could change, grow, and learn to love each other better. And that, it turned out, was the most satisfying victory of all. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about overcoming family obstacles and achieving success despite the odds. Sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming the person you were meant to be all along.